Hi everyone, so thank you for joining this tutorial. This is an introductory tutorial to the interface of Maya. I want to let you know that I respect our space and I thank you for being here in this kind of digital world. Right now, I want to go through some of the simple or not so simple looks of the interface. This is kind of long overdue, but we've kind of gone over it in class a little bit and I want to kind of go over it again. This is the perspective viewport. This window right here is called a viewport. And we know that by pressing spacebar, it can be divided into the various cameras that are listed in the left. This column here, you can click it and see that it goes back to 4 channels, and that basically made it collapse. And the outliner is just a panel that lists all of your materials and your polygons and well, actually just polygons, not really materials. Over here we have the channel box editor, or channel box and layer editor. And in that window, you basically get to see all the stuff that is associated with the geometry and scale and size and location of your primitive, your polygon primitive. So I actually just clicked this cube in the top left-hand corner to bring up this polygon. And we have a list of polygons here that we can kind of easily call upon. You can also create a polygon in this drop-down menu. And really they have more polygons than just the 6 that are listed. There's actually a few more that might be handy, and it's what they call super shapes, which can be divided and subdivided into various planes. So if I have, like, say this ellipse, which actually looks like a sphere, I can click into the input of it and scroll down and create a shape that's different than what it naturally seems to be. So it's not a sphere anymore. I just kind of reduce the size of it by, again, clicking inputs and sorry for that mishap, and creating 3 divisions and 3 horizontal divisions and 1 vertical division. Again, these can be upscaled and brought back. Polymorphic modeling, and in this row, there's tons of different kind of devices here that you can click on. And usually when you hover over, you'll find out what each device or each button kind of brings you to. So we find that even with this button, I can extrude it just by clicking here, which I can also do by pressing Command E or going into the second drop-down menu, which is the modeling toolkit, which can be found over here. So a lot of these things are repeated. The shapes are repeated in the top kind of shelf. This area is kind of called a shelf. And we have a different shelf down here that lists a ton of different other activities. So ones you'll probably be most familiar with are the curves, the polymodeling, the sculpting, and even the rendering, which has all your different materials. Sculpting is interesting in that it has a whole set of tools for building things up kind of like clay. And sometimes you would start with a polygon primitive like a plane. I'm just going to delete these 2 shapes by pressing delete. So you would create a plane and start modeling off of that particular plane. But I'm not going to go into that just yet because I want to kind of go through the various components of this program. So I'm going to delete that. In this kind of perspective mode, I have the option of kind of navigating it in different ways than I do in, say, the various top, front, and side windows. So if you look at this, and I press spacebar again, the perspective window is unique. And it's unique because I can toggle through it in various ways by keeping my finger on Option. So if I click on Option and left click on the mouse, I can kind of navigate this in kind of like a fashion that's kind of like rotating around one center point. So wherever I click, it allows me to kind of just click and hold and press Option and rotate around the entire graph. The center mouse button acts as a zoom in and zoom out. And if I click in my mouse, I can click down on my center mouse button. So when I press Option and I click down on my center mouse button, I can move this area left and right. So I'm moving across the image or the plane, the perspective plane. By pressing Option and right click, I can toggle in and out, much just like the scroll wheel. I can toggle in and out. So the scroll wheel helps and is almost the same thing as this. And I'm dragging it left and right, as you can see. It's important to have these buttons on your mouse, and it's important to know that you have hotkeys on your keyboard. So Option, Spacebar, Shift, Command, Control, even the F1 through F8 or F11 and 12, there might be buttons that can be used there. Also very important is the W, E, and R keys. So if I create this shape, I have the option to go over here into this kind of drop down window, and if I hover over these, it should show, yeah, it pops up, that this is the move tool, and it's controlled by even just pressing W on your keyboard. This is the rotation tool, and it can be controlled by pressing E on the keyboard if it would pop up. Yep. And this is the scale, which can be controlled by pressing R on the keyboard. So I can toggle between here by pressing E, W, and R. Now in this box, you see, and I'm in the scale kind of mode right now. There's tons of different squares that kind of pull this box in separate areas. And just to kind of clarify, and I'm kind of say this in a way that I think makes sense. These squares I've noticed have changed, but the center button usually lets a uniform increase or decrease in whatever you're doing. So that's something that's very important if you're just trying to have like a proportional increase. Going along the y-axis, it extends it up and down, and going along the z-axis, it extends it to the side. Now, same can be said for the x-axis in the back. These other tools, where you see like kind of like a facade of a plane, extends it along two different planes. So if I want to extend along just two and not three planes, I would select one of these, and that allows me to kind of like make a variable change in the size that doesn't affect all X, Y, and Z axes. This gimbal can actually be moved through even just the W, E, and R by pressing D and clicking on this center box. So if I want to say rotate this square from the top axis rather than from the middle point, I can do that. So if we just kind of go into rotation right now, and I'm rotating this square here, and I'm rotating it along this axis, if I press D and move this thing up, the rotation will now be along that axis point. So you can see how that changes, and that might be important for other functionalities, like when you're doing animation or you want to have a specific axis point which to curve this, or which to change the direction. And that works in all variables. Like if I want to change the move tool to the center, or put it on the side here, I can do that. And I can always go back to modify and center pivot, and that should bring the pivot point back to the center of the object that's selected. So you can see that it's selected with this kind of green outliner, and that's kind of very useful if sometimes your center points get lost. These are also important tools here, but that'll be gone over in another tutorial. I want to also point out that um, I'm right now in a perspective plane, so I'm kind of in this, I put this shape at a strange kind of orientation, and by pressing um, the space bar, if I zoom in on different planes, I can kind of guesstimate how, I can do a better guesstimation or a more approximate guesstimation of where this object will sit relative to the rest of the surface. So if I wanted to have this object right, on top of the X plane, I'm much more easier inclined to go into the side view and notice the very small areas where I kind of changed everything up. So this helps to just be aware that you're in more than, that you can look through more than one window. Now, just something to also reference, you can see that this is made up of 4 different circles that I can rotate or, well, mainly rotate this around. This yellow circle that's kind of on all different cameras, that's basically rotating the object around a perpendicular axis to the camera. So imagine you're looking at this camera, and this is rotating it this is rotating the object perpendicular to that camera, and that's helpful because if say you're in this perspective mode and your camera, if your camera is not here but here, it'll rotate around that angle. So wherever I go and I touch that yellow circle and I'm clicking and holding down and dragging, it's rotating around that area. There's like kind of a filling of a gray and like a light gray that's kind of disappearing and changing. That's really just the angle, the degree at which it's changing. So we know that this is about a 90 degree or 180 degree turn from where I started when I first started rotating this square. Probably the hardest thing to kind of like understand is these numbers, and just to kind of run through them as best as I can. Right now I'm sitting in a certain point on the 3 axes. So and I'm here in various degrees on the X, Y, and Z axes. So as I rotate the circle, those numbers change. As I move, the top 3 numbers change depending on the axis that I'm moving along. And again, I can click this center square and move along all axes, or I can click one of these squares and move only along 2 axes, so it won't move along all 3. If you kind of notice that, it's kind of changing depending on where I'm going, which square, which arrow I'm clicking on. Also noted is the size and scale. So my grid, if you notice, is pretty big. Like this is a big scale of the grid, and I went ahead and changed this, and I changed a lot of the measurements. So when I modify change my grid, now right now I go to display and I go to grid, and a lot of these kind of menu drop downs, the selections have these square boxes next to them, and clicking on that square box will bring up what size my grid is. So it's in inches, which is in another drop down menu, which is in preferences and settings. But right now I have my grid divided into 2 subdivisions. If I apply 1, it divides each of these squares into it's basically 1 by 1 by 1 inch squares, and there's 50 units across. So it's basically a 50 by 50 grid, 50 inches by 50 inches. And that might even be just this area. So 1 quadrant of the whole selection might be, I would think, either 50 or 25. And it's worth just kind of knowing that you can change your grid size, to whatever might suit you. So right now, as you can see, I changed it to 5. So each quadrant is a 5 by 5 grid, totaling a 10 by 10 area. And that means because I set it at I set this in settings and preferences at inches, or well, now I changed back, but if it's in centimeters. So this is basically 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. And when I open the first cube, every first cube I open, or polygon, let's say, should basically be 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. And you can see if I kind of move it over into that square, because I only have one subdivision, it pretty much fits into that square. So that's kind of like a rough out of the grid and the whole tool that, the mouse button tools. To go further into this tutorial, because we're kind of like using the attribute editor and we're using the modeling toolkit and the channel box and layer editor, and this is like a super boring tutorial, but note that there's like a lot of drop-down menus that might not be here when I originally opened Maya. So I've added the UV toolkit. I can kind of pull that off and put it back in when this thing highlights. And it's useful because you can have many different, grids that you pull off, or windows that you pull off. A lot of this stuff, like again, can be repeated and put back in. Before I even get into any of this stuff over here, when I click one of these drop-down menus, if I hover over this double line, this double dotted line, and click again, this becomes a drop-down menu too. So that can be done with a lot of different, that can be done with all of these along this shelf right here. I'm just going to close this. A lot of these things are also repeated. So this is an icon for save. This is an icon for undo, redo, maybe a new scene, open scene. And other icons here which become important later on. There's a lot of stuff here. So know that you can kind of see there's a doubling up of a lot of different things. Okay? All right, take care. I'll talk to you guys later.